Hello. Good morning and a warm welcome to everyone joining us here in person and to those of you attending virtually through Facebook Live or Zoom. This is this year's second episode of Monthly Ethics Seminar Series or Friends. What's the title of our event? Monthly Ethics Seminar Series or Mess. Thank you to our speaker who got it right. Yes, indeed. And MESS is a public service information drive that is a regular mainstay activity of the UP Diliman Research Ethics Board. Guess what? It happens monthly. You heard that right. UPD Rebs MESS every month. Mark your calendars. I mean it. Do it now. I'm watching you. And the reason you should catch every episode is because MESS features discussions and lectures on the responsible conduct of research, especially research involving human participants. The topics, too, are very relevant to the current and highly diverse research and scholarly needs of UPD and other academic institutions. This is because MESS is cognizant or mindful of the need to be the power of Christ compels you of the need to be constantly up to date with the latest and the best ethical approaches and standards for conducting research. That said, and I hope you've felt it by now, MESS is designed to be informal, conversational, kapatid, usap tayo. Hence the idea of exchanging ideas over lunch. And now you must be wondering, who is this beautifully unhinged woman who is speaking in front of you? And the answer would be, hi, I'm Bridget Diaz, your moderator for today's discussion. And again, good morning and welcome to Mess. A few reminders. Everyone is encouraged to have their lunch while listening to the guest speaker. Eat, eat, eat. And for our on site attendees, we have free flowing water there at the back. Stay hydrated. Please take note of your questions. We have an open forum where you can participate actively in polls, Q&A, and discussions. As for polls, of course, that's mostly true for the virtual attendees. Make sure to keep your microphone muted when not speaking. I'll take note of that as well. That's for our virtual attendees, mostly at Zoom. To receive your certificates after MESS, fill out the evaluation form. Again, fill out the evaluation form that will be given at the end of this seminar. Certificates of attendance are given to online participants. Meanwhile, certificates of participation are given to on site participants. For our online attendees, please take note of this. Your QR code for the evaluation form will be flashed on screen near the end of the program and also sent through the Zoom chat box. So, again, online participants flashed on the screen near the end of the program and sent through the Zoom chat box. For you guys, our lovely on site attendees, please see your QR code for the evaluation form at the registration area. It's right there with the beautiful Miss Flora. Ba't kayo tumawa? Hindi totoo? Okay. Um, Without further ado, here aboard you, who is today's esteemed guest speaker? Drum roll, please. Just kidding. Dr. Rodalyn C. Wani Obias is an assistant professor of history at the University of the Philippines, Diliman, where she graduated with degrees in BA Sociology and MA History. She is currently a PhD candidate in history at UPD, with her research focused on exploring networks of propaganda between 19th century Philippines and Europe. Aside from 19th century Philippines and the Philippine propaganda movement, her research interests also include discourses on nationalism and identity, social history, and history of emotions. Oh my God! Ungkatan ng past. Kaya niyo ba ungkatin yung history ng emotions niyo? If you can't, she definitely can do so and do even more. Presenting her lecture on ethics and historical research in the Philippines, let us welcome Dr. Rodalyn Wani Obias.
Magandang hapon po sa ating lahat. Maraming salamat po sa inyong pagdalo. Magpapakilala muna ako. Although pinakilala naman din ako dito. My name is Rodel Wani Obias from UP Diliman. Siyempre, beginning my talk, I'd like to thank UP Diliman Research Ethics Board for providing me with the opportunity to present a topic on the social sciences. Likewise, I extend my appreciation to the College of Social Sciences and Philosophy Ethics Review Board. I see our staff here whose support has been very helpful, especially in furnishing some of the data we present this afternoon. While I sit on the Ethics Review Board of CSSP, I feel that I must also mention that I come from the Department of History. Thus, my presentation today is informed largely by historical researches that have come under our review in the past few years. My presentation today interrogates what types of ethical concerns emerge in doing historical research in the Philippines. As mentioned earlier, much of what I will present is drawn from my experience as a sitting board member of the CSSP ERB. One of my primary tasks is to ensure that the ethics review of all historical researches done by our students and faculty from the discipline of history in CSSP. I then end my presentation with an important question that faces many historians today. Why do we need a code of ethics for historians? I'd like to begin my presentation with a quick overview explaining the formation and composition of the Ethics Review Board in our college. This will then be followed by a discussion of three case studies in order that I may highlight some ethical concerns in historical research. I then end with some discussion on why we need a code of ethics. The CSSP Ethics Review Board's purpose is to protect the safety, rights, and welfare of human participants and affected communities in social science research, while taking into account the interests and needs of researchers and complying with the requirements of applicable laws, rules, and issuance of regulatory authorities. As an institutional entity, the CSSP ERB is relatively new, and we can trace its beginning to approximately 2019. Before this year, CSSP had its own Research Ethics Committee composed of representatives from various departments, but this committee met only sporadically and was not active. Researches done within our college was handled and assessed by their respective departments, who in their own ways had their own practices in regard to conducting ethical research. By 2019, the Research Ethics Committee began to meet more regularly, and preparations for drafting an SOP manual began in earnest. After several consultations with the various departments, the SOP manual was finally approved through a college faculty assembly in 2021. Additionally, the CSSP Dean at that time, Dr. Bernadette Abrera, also issued a memo requiring all researchers in CSSP to go through an ethical review process and acquire ethics clearance. With these acts, the CSSP ERB was formally established. Currently, the CSSP ERB is composed of 6 panels, loosely disciplinary in composition, and each has regular scientist members, non affiliate members, and non scientist members. The task of the panels are to review research proposals, also known as protocols, from CSSP faculty, students, and staff. Just to give you an idea of the work that we do, I present here data of protocols reviewed for the year 2024. So you can see from the period January to December 2024, CSSP ERB had reviewed a total of 170 protocols. Of this 170, 14 was sent to the protocol. So, yung medyo madami talaga napupuntahan na protocols sa either anthropology or sociology, psychology. These are the panels that are really sobrang busy-busy sa protocols nila. So, in the field of history, dominant perceptions of historians always reveal individuals closeted away in archives poring over old documents. With the introduction of oral history, however, more historians are now engaged in field history and in the use of oral history methods. Alongside such changes are ethical concerns that need to be considered as well. For oral historians, and I quote, a code of ethics emphasized the researcher's responsibility to avoid harm to human subjects, At the same time, social scientists are commanded by the guidelines of their professions not to distort or suppress research findings. Dilemmas often arise over which takes priority, the narrator's well being or the respect for evidence. End quote. From this, I like to think of ethics as a delicate balance between risks and benefit. As shown in the photo, our institutional requirements cautions and reminds us of the research risk, yet our disciplinary and professional needs compel us to go forth, explore, and discover new knowledge. Ethical considerations are applied to oral history, which refers to both the interview process and the products that result from the spoken interview. This may be an audio recording, a video, or other formats. The value always placed on oral history, in addition to an already wide recognition of the rich descriptions of oral narratives, lies largely in the way it helps to place people's experiences within a larger social and historical context. Like the photo in this slide, which tells the story of labor strikes occurring in Manila over a period of various years under the Marcos dictatorship, oral histories too tell stories within particular context, that is, the period when these individuals lived. Additionally, the oral history process from the interview stage through the interview stage, through preservation, use, and access must be guided by respect for narrators and the communities from which they come from. In the following slides, I relate three case studies of historical researches conducted in the Philippines. These are all from graduate students from the discipline of history and CSSP, and they serve to highlight particular ethical concerns that affect our discipline. In our first case study, we have an MA history student who decided to research second generation American Filipinos, known as the Vietnam generation, are specialists who graduated from Michigan, Yale, and Wisconsin from 1963 to 1975. The researcher interviewed a total of 11 Vietnam generation scholars over a 4-year period from 2020 to 2024. One of the most salient aspects in the oral history process was how actively engaged the respondents were, and the researcher, in many instances, had to write a narrative that satisfied all the respondents. When the narrator insisted that some points be redacted from the study, the researcher had to comply. In the end, the result of such back and forth correspondence was a historical narrative that was created by both the narrators and the researcher. This example highlights one hallmark concept in oral history, which is a dynamic and collaborative relationship between the interviewer and narrators. As stated in the American Oral History Association's guidelines, I quote, while interviewers pose questions based on research and careful preparation, narrators shape the interview based on what they deem to be relevant, meaningful, or appropriate to share. Despite the fluid nature of the interview process, an oral history is grounded in thoughtful planning and careful follow through of the agreed upon process. Our second case study comes from a PhD history student. The study is focused on the life of a guerrilla fighter who had fought during World War II. The interviews were originally conducted by the grandson of the guerrilla fighter and then were entrusted to the researcher. This situation raised some questions regarding the secondary use of qualitative data, and the researcher was asked by the ERB to get documentary consent from the original interviewer. Additionally, some of the interviews contained sensitive data on the assassination of the guerrilla fighter after the war. Because of this, the researcher was asked by the ERB to ensure the protection of all its respondents. But by this time, the researcher had begun to feel restricted and frustrated by the ethical requirements imposed on by the ERB and decided to change the direction of the research, this time with more reliance given to documentary sources rather than oral ones. This example brings to the foreground two ethical concerns. Firstly, There is the question of the secondary use of qualitative data. And secondly, there is a concern of the risks that arise from sensitive information. Even if the event had happened in the past, the question still arose what repercussions the narrative would have to the present generation. Sadly, one other matter that we can glean from this study was how, for some researchers, ethical processes do feel restrictive. While over the years we have attempted to emphasize the importance of ethical processes, this feeling of frustration on what is perceived to be constraints in their researches is one that we often still see from the researchers themselves. Our final case study is from an MA history student whose focus is on the massacre of Muslims that occurred in Malisbong, Palimbang, Sultan Kudarat in Mindanao in 1974 under the Marcos dictatorship. Here is an example of sensitive historical topics that carry potentially grave ethical concerns, especially since the study looks particularly at how violence was used by a dictator to suppress a marginalized group. Even today, there were those who perceived the field site as potentially dangerous given its long history of being a site of conflict. Thus, from the outset, the primary concern of the ERB was to ensure the safety of the researcher. Secondly, because the researcher claimed the necessity of using translators, there was also a need to establish a clear distinction of tasks between the researcher and translator. This was integral since responsible scholarship always dictates that we properly attribute tasks to their rightful actors. Another concern that arose had to do with access to data, which needed to be explained more explicitly in this study. In the discipline of history, we place so much value in archiving data that in our own researches, we always have in mind the eventual archiving of information for future use. In instance of studies that contain sensitive topics, such as the one in this case study, we also raise this question of providing eventual access, anonymized of course, to a wider public. What this study then highlights are the safety of the researcher, the distinct roles between a researcher and translator, and access to data. So, putting all this together, the key concerns I put forward in the three case studies I presented highlights the following. One, the relationship of the researcher with narrators need to be based on mutual respect and collaboration. Two, secondary use of qualitative data need to have proper consent. Three, the risk of sensitive data from the past need to be considered carefully in relation to the risk it may give to the present generation. Four, the safety of the researcher must also be guaranteed, especially in sites of conflict. Five, the use of a translator needs to be distinguished from the researcher. And finally, public access to data may be considered as part of history's predisposition towards archiving data. Thus far, I have presented some of the ethical concerns that arise from history protocols submitted to the CSSP ERB. But despite the attempts of the board to address ethical concerns in the social sciences and to push forward an ethics code more nuanced for social scientists, I have discovered through conversations with faculty, students, and fellow lovers of history that there are unique features in the discipline of history that needs even more careful consideration. In our small community of history practitioners, we all know of a professor who self plagiarized or of a teacher who claimed the students' work as their own. We empathize with our respondents who sometimes claim that they feel used by researchers. We feel the frustration of those whose access to the archives have been severely limited. We are devastated when a historical building has been torn down or an important monument blocked by high rise condos. And even in our day to day lives, we encounter in social media countless blatant historical distortions in politics, education, many other fields. Are these not concerns of ethics in history? We know inherently and perhaps even feel with absolute certainty that these are all wrong. But why exactly is it wrong? Are there moral, professional, or legal rules that we have violated with these acts? I leave those questions hanging for now. In the Philippines, there are no specific ethical guidelines for professional historians. Those conducting research, particularly oral history, have been largely informed by their own institutional ethics boards, like in our case, the ERB established at CSSP. What these tell us is that despite the lack of a clear ethical code, for historians, there is at least a growing recognition that a relationship should exist between history and ethics. William Galloy, professor of history, states that while history concerns itself chiefly with paths which were taken, ethics is as interested in those which were not followed. Both history and ethics are founded on notions of judgment, but great differences lie between the historian's desire to narrate the truth of the past and the ethicists hope to eliminate the moral value of human behavior. To understand this relationship between history and ethics, we need to first define what we consider to be abuse and irresponsible use of history. In the following discussion, I draw largely from the work of Anton de Betz, a professor of history, ethics, and human rights in the Netherlands. He is founder and coordinator of the Network of Concerned Historians, an organization who aids censored or persecuted historians. In sharing his ideas now, I do not intend to prescribe or tell Filipino historians what to do, but rather I wish to provide a starting point upon which we can all begin conversing. In his book, Responsible History, the Betts defined the difference between abuse and irresponsible use of history. He states that the abuse of history is its use with intent to deceive. The irresponsible use of history is either its deceptive or negligent use. All abuse of history is irresponsible history, but not all irresponsible history is an abuse of history. So, the essential distinction here between the abuse and irresponsible use of history is located at the level of intention. So, moreover, the Betts also categorizes levels of irresponsible and abuse of history. At the heuristic level, there is the abuse at the level of data collection. When historians collect sources maliciously, they commit heuristic abuse. An example of this would be stealing documents from the archives, pickpocketing artifacts from the museum, or even blackmailing informants. At the yeah, binusa mo talaga. At the epistemological level, abuse is committed at the level of data description and analysis. The distortion of facts or a wrongful analysis provided by a historian happens at the epistemological level when they dishonestly omit, trim, or invent data or knowingly present non scientific theories as scientific ones or distort provisionally scientific theories. Historians commit epistemological abuse. This is the classic form of abuse. Finally, at the pragmatic level, we look at the level of reception of a work. The pragmatic abuse of history occurs when historians lie about their authorship or the status of their work, or when others irresponsibly interfere with it. The result of abuse deserves the name pseudo-scientific history, pseudo-history, or even bogus history. But what about the weight of abuse? How to determine which abuses are more grave than others? The BETS again provides a guide to evaluate. The first is traceability, which simply states that the abuse that makes data untraceable are more harmful than others. This is because the stronger the untraceability, the harder to recognize or measure the abuse or its harm. On this principle, destruction is worse than falsification. The second principle has to do with refutability, where abuses are more harmful when they make refutation impossible. For instance, irresponsible omission of factual data is worse than falsifying or inventing them because omission renders refutation more difficult. The final principle has to do with trust, where abuse is committed when falsification and fabrication arouse more distrust in historical writing and its practitioners. While these principles are helpful, they are actually not enough to evaluate completely the abuse because several questions remain. For instance, when we look at the abuse and textual context, if a historical works contains 100 true statements and only one malicious statement, can the whole work now be considered an abuse of history? It's just something to ponder on. Second, when we talk about abuse and frequency, if the frequency of irresponsible use, abuse is more grave than irresponsible history because irresponsible is negligence. Abuse is there's this intention to really mislead. There's a malicious intent behind it. But what happens if the responsible use of history amounts to more than just an abuse of history, which is now more grave? And what about sanctions? What types of sanctions should be given to irresponsible and abuses in history? These are all important questions to ponder on, and debates implores historians to consider all these factors when creating a code of ethics for historians. As shown very briefly, it's not a simple matter of just determining the abuse and imposing sanctions. So we go back to this question: why is the abuse of history wrong? Morally, it is wrong because citizens, including citizens who are historians, have the moral duty to be honest. Even if there are circumstances where one is not obliged to tell all of the truth, the intent of not speaking should not be to deceive. Professionally, it is also wrong because professional and academic historians have a duty to apply scholarly and professional standards of care, in particular to search honestly and methodically for the historical truth. And finally, legally, it is also wrong, especially if you have laws in place that that has been violated and puts a risk of harm to other people. So, in the end, we raise one last question: do we need a code of ethics for historians? The Betts provides 10 reasons why we should. He says a code is the focus of moral awareness and debate among historians. A code formulates the rights and duties of historians. It is an instrument to teach the core of the profession to students. It is a compass to detect irresponsible uses and abuses of history. It is an instrument to evaluate and to adjudicate conflicts. It helps reduce and prevent irresponsible uses and abuses of history. It clarifies the foundations and limits of the historical profession for those in and outside of it. It helps to protect historians against pressure. It enhances the autonomy, transparency, and accountability of the historical profession, and it increases public trust in and understanding of the historical profession. My personal view on the matter is that we do need a code of ethics in history. However, I will emphasize that it must be one that is born out of careful consideration and deliberation. It must be a product of ideas coming from various history practitioners. Most importantly, it must strike a balance between the interests of historians and those that they engage with in their work. In today's world, where facts are easily distorted and when the line between truth and lies are maliciously blurred, we as historians persevere to protect our freedom and integrity and to respect our continuous search for the truth. Maraming salamat po.
Yes, for that insightful talk and her
Kunin ko lang.
experience. So much. All right. Now that we have not only eaten lunch, hopefully you guys found time to grab something for your bellies, especially since we've been feeding our minds with the help of Dr. Wani Obias. Um, of course, now it's your time to share, your time to engage. Any questions for our wonderful speaker? Yes.
I actually have a problem with the legal thing because why would I give the government the power to who? Let's say the Leviathan. Why would I give the Leviathan the power over me when it comes to like they are also propagating historical distortion? I'm not just saying about the Marcoses. I think the government always has the tendency to control historical narratives. Why would I give a thing when it comes to legality? Like for example, I just want to use One Piece as an annotation. Like this is an anime and a manga, like where Nico Robin is like um Nico Robin, the historian character in One Piece, is persecuted by the world government because of the void century they are searching for. So I think uh to make this short, why would I give the legality a thing when it comes when the Leviathan controls the information and such and like that?
Okay, I think, yeah, medyo when I said the legal aspect here, I meant it to mean that when we ask the question why history is wrong, because we all know it's wrong. You know, when some historian does something, alam mo, mali siya. But you have to be much more specific about bakit mali siya. Hindi pwedeng sabihin mo, feel ko lang mali siya, 'di ba? So, ang magiging basihan mo ngayon para sabihin na mali siya is one, meron the or moral aspect that we are all obligated to tell the truth. I think sometimes, our politicians forget that, but we are all obligated to tell the truth morally. And then the second is that professionally, especially if you're a professional historian or a history practitioner, you're also obligated by professional conduct to be respectful of the discipline. Legally, it can also be wrong if meron tayong laws in place. So the question is, meron ba tayong laws in place na nilalabag when we abuse history? Depende siguro. I mean, we have Data Privacy Act. That's one. Lagi siyang binabanggit. We also have copyright laws, so we have those laws in place. So it's not a matter of isusuko mo yung kaalaman mo sa gobyerno para ito ay panghawakan nila. I think what needs to also be, parang pwede rin kasing baliktad. When we have a code of ethics, it also protects us from the government. Yung binabanggit ko si Anton de Boats, he's working with persecuted na historians who work particularly in dictatorial societies. So, lagi silang nasa-censor, lagi silang nape-persecute, and yet a code of ethics would be helpful in the way that it also can protect the historians themselves. So, hindi siya matter of isusuko mo. It's a matter of pwede mo rin siyang i-rationalize na may nilabag kang batas kaya merong abuse of history. Bakit mali yung pag-abuse ng history? Kasi hindi na dapat pwedeng feel ko lang mali. You have to be able to rationalize bakit siya mali. At yun yung tatlo na sinabi ko. Morally, and then, professionally, perhaps legally. Yeah.
Wonderful. Already an interesting, complex, and engaging question. Who wants to follow that? No pressure. Again, informal, conversational. Kapatid, usap tayo. Hi. Hi.
Hello po, Ma'am Wani. So I have a question about Chico's case study too, where you mentioned that there was sensitive information about the guerrilla's assassination after the war. So may I ask how exactly was this information sensitive? And also, isn't it like a part of the historian's duty to also shed light on this part of the guerrilla's life?
Yeah. Okay, dito medyo dito mo makikita how the past still affects the present. Kasi halimbawa dun sa case na 'yan na, merong binabanggit na assassination, merong potential effect on the family. So, especially if the family explicitly states, "Ayaw namin na lumabas 'yan." You as an interviewer have to respect that. Kahit na parang gustong-gusto mo siyang ilabas, that you are bound by duty a historian, ilabas yung kaalaman mo tungkol sa guerrilla na ito. In the end, kwento siya ng narrator ng pamilya na ito, at 'pag sinabi nila na hindi puwede, irerespeto mo siya. And then we are also bound by Data Privacy Act. So if they insist on that, ay makakaapekto talaga siya. So yeah, challenge siya for the historians, because you think that you're just historians going out in the field para akala mo past lang inaaral mo. But when in fact, yung past na yan also affects etong present generation. But sometimes medyo exaggerate, medyo may mga extreme cases din as well. Because I've heard some students who say, halimbawa, nasa National Archives sila and these documents are more than 100 years old. And yet, they'll be told, kailangan mo kunin yung consent ng mga inapon nila. In that case, like, anong gagawin mo? That's probably like the great-grandchildren already. Susundan mo ba yan? So, we also need to ask, as a profession, naiintindihan natin that the past affects the present, but just how far back to the past are we going to affect? How is it going to affect our work? 100 years ago? 200 years ago? 300 years ago? If you're doing 16th century Philippines, di ba? And then somebody says, "Oh, ayoko. Ako yung, lolo ko yan," and so on and so forth. Ayoko na banggitin mo ito. Like, di ba may limit din sa atin? And nauunawaan natin. And there's no clear rules in our profession that tells you hanggang 100 years lang yung reckoning na yan, or so on and so forth. Kaya mahirap siyang sagutin. Exactly how far back in the past will it affect the present? Kasi yun yung crucial question diyan.
Thank you so much for our on-site audience's questions. For now, we'll give the floor to our Zoom participants. All right, from Zoom. In interviews, informants tend to share more than is needed by the researcher. Do we stop them or just ignore the information in our data transcription?
Sobrang saya 'pag yung informants share a lot, 'di ba? But you as hindi, I don't know. I mean, if you've gone and done interviews, it's so happy when ang mahirap nga ay yung 'pag nag-i-elicit ka, hirap na hirap pa sagutin, pero yung isang respondent na sumasagot na ta's todo-todo na yung kwento, sobrang saya niyan. But you also have to recognize your role. You're not just an interviewer, you're also moderating the interview. So kung medyo lumilihis na yung usapan, malayo na dun sa pinapaksa mo, kung magaling ka talaga na interviewer ay ibabalik mo siya dun sa circle of concern ninyo, 'di ba? It takes practice, I guess, after a while. In the beginning, maybe you're not so skillful about it, but through practice, madadala mo siya eh. Lalo na kung yung mga matatanda kausap niyo, parang non-stop yung mga kwento niyan. Like, parang they haven't talked to somebody for so long and they want to share so many things. You also need to just moderate. You're not just there to ask questions and engage. You should also moderate. So, do you stop them or just ignore them? Nasa sa'yo na yan. Relevant pa ba? And then can you just steer the conversation towards the direction that you want it to go? 'Di ba? So, yun naman yun.
All right. Thank you, Doc Wani Obias. Next Zoom question. I agree with Dr. Obias' stance on code of ethics. Are there existing codes of proposals for a code of ethics for historians in the professional societies? I am comparing this to how societies of professions and social scientists institutionalized these codes in the past decades.
Okay, in abroad meron sila. And meron din very particularly malakas yung code sa mga oral historians, obviously, right? But like I showed you, history is not just oral history. We also have heritage workers, we have academic na historians. Lahat yan dapat sakop ng isang code for historians, 'di ba? Meron bang move yung Filipino historical organizations? Yes. There's three historical organizations I know that at least one have begun conversations about ethics. I think ang move dapat is to broaden pa. So palawakin pa ito. Ang alam ko ay they will attempt to talk to mga Department of Histories all around the country. Um, I fully support yung ganyang klaseng move, and I think the more people come into the conversation, the much more nuanced and enriching the code that we will hopefully end up with. Yan. Pero anyan, that's just early stages. Sobrang early stages talaga. Parang December lang nagsimula yung pag-uusap. Pero, ah, so to I guess, put it simply, wala pang code yung mga professional historians. Meron tayong social sciences na code like the Ethics Board and CSSP. Pero tulad ng pinakita ko, there's something nuanced sa history as a discipline. So I have so many questions from students who come and ask me, iaakyat ko sa board, anong gagawin? Di rin nila masagot. Kasi it's just unique to our discipline. Kaya naisip ko, kahit na meron tayong social science na ethics board, maganda rin na meron yung history as a discipline.
Meron pa, right? Oh, Um, those have been two interesting Zoom questions. The next one is good afternoon. Good afternoon, sorry. Dr. Wani Obias, we'd just like to ask if you could go through the ethical process itself in evaluating a historical manuscript. How is a manuscript gauged for being in conformity or in disagreement with ethical standards?
Anong ibig sabihin sa historical manuscript? Book manuscript or archival document? um, Anyway, kung historical document like the primary sources that are the food for historians, we already know internal, external criticism. You can go through that for you to be able to evaluate your documents. Kung manuscript siya for a historical work like a book or a research article, well, it has to go through reviewers, and the reviewers will be the one to assess yung kung merong problems on ethicality dun sa mga works ninyo.
See, just learned we have even more questions from Zoom. I hope everyone's still excited to feed their minds. Um, while we're waiting, I just like to say I do agree. I'm a sociology major, but based on what I've heard, history does seem very nuanced, very interesting. And I rarely say that because I love sociology. It's the best.
Some of my colleagues are here and some of my students are here. So, anyway, if in case may mga questions ay papatulong ako sa mga colleagues ko. Eto ay nasagot ko na.
Here. Uh,
Yung parang may intimate, I just caught the
Thank you very much for your very insightful presentation, Dr. Wani Obias. What advice could you give to historians who use sensitive or intimate sources, such as patient case files or medical records? How much of their personal data could we ethically reprint in our narratives slash research?
I guess the first question here is, ito yung example na covered by Data Privacy Act. So, any identifying data that you have on itong patient, then you'll have to probably redact it from your work. But like I said, yung nuance sa history is, what if medical record ito from the Spanish period, from the American period, 100 years ago, 150 years ago? Does that still apply? Unfortunately, I cannot answer that properly because like I said, walang malinaw na rule in place for historians. Kasi kung contemporary ito, covered siya ng Data Privacy Act. So pwede mong sabihin, I can't divulge any identifying data about these patients. Maybe you can describe like yung case studies na pinakita ko kanina, I made such a conscious effort not to use he or she or so and then kailangan wala akong ina-identify na tao, binabanggit ko lang ito yung study, ito yung ginawa nila, di ko binabanggit any identifying data sa kanila. That's what you would have to end up doing with a work like this. But it's different if your sources are 200 years old, 300 years old. What then? Yes.
Perhaps your point of view. If, for example, um, the historical records are already there,
Yes.
you're going to use the historical record. So you cannot rub out the name on the historical record. But you, as a current historian, researcher, in the way that you relate your narrative, current narrative, would it be a good guideline to actually not identify, like anonymous, on your part,
Mhm.
you just have to cite your
Yeah, yeah,
reference.
yeah.
Kung may taong magbabasa, malalaman nila eventually, but they have to exert the extra effort to do
Yes, to
so.
find out.
Yes. What do you think about that particular guide?
Because there's always the option to anonymize. You can discuss sa halimbawa mga case studies na ito, but you'll say, oh, si Juan de la Cruz, patient ganito, so on and so forth. You anonymize ito. And this is to protect yung ano nyo. There is also actually also yung concern of whether it's a public document or not, 'di ba? Public siya, dapat ano na siya sa lahat. But sometimes along the way, descendants will come out and say, "Oh no, I don't want it that divulged." Halimbawa, example, the medical cases of lepers. Let's say American period lepers siya or AIDS patients. You're looking at the history of AIDS or you're looking at the history of lepers. And then these are in Philippine society, I guess, medyo tabu pa. Ito hindi pa napapag-usapan openly, itong mga diseases na ito. And then suddenly you're handling yung mga case files nila. And then you want to divulge. So the question is, do you divulge their identity or not? Pwede mo siyang gawin, pero I think personally, I tend to lean towards a more cautious stance. So, yung mas cautious stance, mas careful for me at least, would be to either redact any identifying information or just anonymize them. Make their names, change their names or whatever, anonymize yung ganyan. Or, medyo matrabaho, kukuha ka ng consent, 'di ba? Na gamitin yung kanilang case files. But yun yung sinasabi ko, what if you have 100 medical records, 100 consent yung kukunin mo, 'di ba? Kaya medyo matrabaho talaga siya. Sorry, yes.
Yeah, you
Mm.
uh, anonymize the person, but syempre need pa rin ng citation how can
I-cite mo pa rin siya. So you'll cite case file number ganito, but at least in your published work, anonymous siya. Whoever's reading that, gusto kong balikan sino to. Hindi siya yung mag-e-effort tulad ng nabanggit ni Ma. Siya yung mag-e-effort na halungkatin yung mga sources para hanapin yung case, particular case na binabanggit mo. Yan. Hindi na. Because syempre you inform in the beginning of the study that I have anonymized all persons that I mentioned in this study. So whoever researcher follows you should also be aware of that na. Hindi na. A good historical researcher always goes back to the source. Hindi ako yung primary source, 'di ba? I'm the secondary source na diyan. Babalikan niya yung primary source.
Magandang tanghali po. Alex Tamayo po sa Paridel Journal. Um, nakaka nakaka-ano rin ako, nakaka-encounter ako ng mga ganito. And what we do is we do not ako ang ina-advise ko sa mga ano, huwag kayong maglalagay ng pangalan. Yung ano lang, yung pseudonym, gano'n. Kasi 'pag naglagay ka ng pseudonym, especially pagka na-encounter ko 'to sa ano, sa research sa internet, sa Twitter, gano'n. Um, 'wag maglalagay ng pseudonym kasi yung pseudonym na ilalagay ninyo, baka meron ding may handle na gano'n. So hahanapin nila yon and they will think that that pseudonym is that same person. So yun yung ethical concern. So stick with uh, poster number one, anonymous number one, yung ganun lang when doing yung anonymizing yung ano sources ninyo. And of course, yes, citation. Uh, Citations talaga kung ano. And it doesn't matter kung ano yung ano mo, kung ano yung papangalan mo, anonymous. Yung magbabasa, they have to go through the reference search for that. Sila na bahala.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, so we've had plenty of Zoom questions. Back to you, on-site participants. Thank you for that wonderful discussion. Even included our chair, the UPD Rep, Dr. De Hungria. But again, we'd like to hear. We'd like to hear more from you. Anybody? Oh, hi. Yes.
Hello again, Mamani. So, I think a lot of historians know that one of the best sources you can hope to chance across is like personal correspondences, like personal letters, stuff like that. I mean, you've created a study on the personal letters of Marcelo del Pilar. But from a present day perspective, I think many of us would feel kind of weird if 100 years from now somebody would look through our personal correspondences and then publish them, exposing all of our secrets and private life to the public. So right now, is it still kind of considered appropriate to publish these sorts of things, or is it kind of fair game because they're dead or they're famous already?
Sources na rin siya, 'di ba? So, I mean, I don't yung hesitation mo to use these types of sources is coming from much more modern sensibilities. The kind of sensibilities that you have today. If you feel uncomfortable using etong sources na ito, then don't. But whoever handles yung sources na ganito, letters, correspondence, professional historians are taught to handle them with care. You're not just gonna disrespect yung letters na yan. Kahit personal siya, you always handle yung sources with care. So, ano yung concern mo dito? Mapapahiya? Or ano? So, that's what you're taught in history, right? How to deal with the sources, how to read it properly, how to take care of yung narratives that are drawn from yung sources na yan. And so, I don't see anything unethical dyan. Kung nag-iingat ka naman. Kasi the question you ask, are you harming anyone? 'Di ba? And if you're taking care of yung sources, you're very careful of the way that you use sources, even making conclusions drawn from that sources, you're very careful and you have to make sure meron talagang basehan yung pinagsasabi mo. Then I don't think, there's anything wrong with that. Kung halimbawa nag-imbento ka, wala naman siya sa source. Tapos nag-imbento ka lang, you made some weird conclusion na sobrang off tangent, wala siya dun sa sulat. Then you are disrespecting the source. Then you are doing some unethical matter. Parang unethical na yung ginagawa mo. Kasi nag-iimbento ka ng conclusion, wala naman dun. But history is not It's scientific in the sense that dapat may evidence lahat ng sinasabi mo, and the evidence is drawn from yung sources, ba? Kaya yun, mag-iingat ka lang sa source, yun.
All right. Anybody else? On site. Come on. Team on site. Okay. Breakdown muna sila. Back to Zoom. What role do historians play in shaping national identity and public memory in the Philippines today?
So, this is mga motherhood statements to know. Um, uh, Historians have a very important role. Okay, a very important role. But I also have to state that we are not the only ones, na stakeholders sa usapin ng national identity and public memory. The government has such a big stake in that, even determining what kind of holidays we have ay galing sa gobyerno. That's all part of that. So historians, for the good and the bad, ay siyempre hinuhubog din namin ito, yung national identity, public memory. Pero siguro ang gusto ko na lang sabihin in relation to that, these are constantly changing. So every generation of historians will probably come up with their own kind of history. So magbabago din siya. So the entity that you say public memory, national identity, it's something that's ongoing, becoming pa rin yan. Hindi yan something na na-create 19th century sila Jose Rizal. That's still ongoing. And historians are not the only shapers of that. Marami pa. Even, mga ordinaryong mamamayan, bahagi din sila. Even social media, I guess maybe social media has such a big role on that now. So, ang daming stakeholders yan.
Next question. I am currently studying MA History, Local History, and Ethnohistory in UP Baguio. What are the specific research ethics guidelines that we need to follow when we're working with indigenous peoples? How can we assure that our research is culturally sensitive and respectful of indigenous knowledge and practices?
Okay, hello. Hindi ko sure kung sa UP Baguio ay meron kayong ethics review board. I've heard that UP Los Baños has, but meron ba sa UP Baguio? Ginagawa pa lang sa UP Baguio. Pero dito sa CSSP, kapag may mga gumagawa ng pag-aaral sa indigenous peoples, syempre kukuha ka ng clearance galing sa ethics review board. Plus, dapat meron ka ring clearance from NCIP. So, ano siya, actually, yung isa naming graduate student ay nandito ngayon, gumagawa on indigenous peoples. And one of the requests that they put forward was that our department maybe, or yung panel namin sa History Ethics Review Board is to come up with a lecture on how we can apply for an ethics review clearance at CSSP plus NCIP. So, that's something in the works, and if that pushes through, kasi mag-iimbita kami ng mga tao na magbabahagi tungkol sa proseso na ito, ay ipapaabot din namin sa UP Baguio yung ganitong kaalaman kung merong session tungkol dito.
We here at the DNA Analysis Lab, Dr. Cora, we here at the DNA Analysis Lab have gotten NCIP agreement. So we've been monitored. Meron silang itinatag na Indigenous Knowledge Systems and Practices, like the SP team. So in some of our research, like when we went to Mindoro to study the genetics of the Mangyan groups in Mindoro, when we went to the field, we had to do our application for clearance from NCIP. Whenever we engage the communities, we have a monitoring team sent from their provincial office, identified, etc. And then last year and the year before, we returned to before publication. None of this material is published yet. We're writing it, but when we generated our results following the administrative order, we also went back to the communities to inform them first. So it's their story, and therefore we committed to informing them. So, balik dun sa tanong, it's something that CSSP were so open to work with you. Kasi when you talk about genetics, ang tao hindi lang naman DNA yan. Ang daming social dimension that we need to learn and consider before we even go to the field. So one thing that we hope, and Ma'am here is actually part of the UP Diliman Research Ethics Board that we hope to launch, start operating within March this year, 2025. Calling Chancellor, calling DC Carl, nag-proclaim, are you online? We need your signatures. Yun lang yun eh. But we hope to be in operations by March. Which means we're working with, para lang kasi nag-attend kayo, so chichismis ako ng konti. Privileged information. Now, what we've been working with UP Manila is accredited up to level 3. Pag indigenous people kasi kailangan mo na hanggang level 2. When we're applying for our own accreditation UP Diliman, magsa-start tayo ng level 1, which was we were worried about kasi hindi masasakop yung IP research where there's a considerable amount. So now in our negotiation with UP Manila and UP Manila generously calling on Edlin Jimenez, you're there in the Zoom, is that we are going to use their accreditation level, which is level 3, and they will monitor us, including ma'am, when we review the protocols here in Diliman. So operational up to level 2 tayo, we're hoping by March 2025. And then of course, ang iniling natin sa UP Diliman community, ni-engage ko na kayo kung meron kayo mga suggestions, kasi baby pa tayo baby steps. If you have suggestions on what topics to cover, what policies to include, what we aim to do in UP Diliman Reb, with the ladies and the guys here, is we want to be able to capture those policies that are lacking in the National Ethical Guidelines for research involving human participants dated 2022. Next year, magsa-start na ang amendment for the next lot of policy. So if you have suggestions, you're willing to work with us and contact us. Social science policies, historical policies, genetic policies, whatever policies. Okay? Thank you,
ma'am.
very much.
Okay.
Right? Now we mukhang na-energize tayo ni Doc. Meron tayong mga response.
Magandang hapon po. Can you comment on the ethical concerns and guidelines in relation to the AI, especially Gen AI, in your area?
Okay.
Thank you.
I think that's another thing that's very relevant. And we need to start talking about AI as well. Abroad, it's talked about constantly, pero tayo ay medyo kailangan pa nating humabol. We see it very clearly, especially in our teaching and, and I guess in the works that are being produced. It affects historians greatly because with the increase of AI, also there's the increase of risk of falsification, fabrication. That's one on the one hand. On the other hand, we also see may use siya. Halimbawa, if we use documents na Spanish documents or documents in a different language, sobrang nakakatulong yung AI sa pagsasalin. Hindi siya perfect na salin, but at least may salin that you can use preliminarily sa pag-aaral mo. So, in that sense, as a tool to help your research, we also recognize na may ganun. Pero there is also that danger. Kaya, and I guess yung concern dito is, I've talked to some people in the sciences, parang yung mga activities nila, assignments nila, doesn't affect them at all. Kasi, I don't know, empirical or what, but us, puro writing assignments, puro essays, puro research papers, and we can tell when the students submit something AI generated. I don't know how the students still have the parang ang lakas ng loob nilang mag-submit pa rin ng AI stuff, but we can tell. Kasi, something like as the first paragraph sounds strange, the second paragraph sounds strange, and then the third sobrang perfect grammar and perfect agad, parang alam mo na agad disconnect and there's some parang produced ata 'to, and then as a teacher parang meron ka ng gut instinct na may something dito na hindi tama. My comment really is we need to talk about it. And I think it also, like the ethics guidelines, needs to be nuanced because we see merong pros, but there are also cons. Should we have guidelines on AI as well? I guess my stand is the same as yung ethics guidelines. Dapat meron, pero dapat informed yung guidelines nito by the context, by the nuances of every discipline, and yung experiences ng mga practitioners. It shouldn't be something that is imposed by sa taas or whatever na wala namang may alam sa disiplina mo. It has to be the product of conversations of people working on the field. Yeah.
Any more questions? I saw more hands. Yes.
Ali po, ako po si Mark Lester Asel, Project Taysay. Tanong ko rin po, may pagtutulungan po ba ang ERB at ang NCPAG since ang NCPAG ay signed na as a consultant for policymakers? So, meron po bang pagtutulungan ERB dito at NCPAG lalo't kung nais natin maiakyat pa ito sa national level, yung mga regulations?
Okay, sa ngayon, ang CSSP-ERB is exclusively for the College of Social Sciences and Philosophy. May mga nagtatanong din sa amin kahit nasa labas siya ng kolehiyo, pero medyo social science related yung research, kung pwede namin siyang i-review. And we say sa ngayon ay hindi. It's not because we're being exclusivist. There is also the more logistical aspect na hindi madali mag-review at minsan napakarami nito at kakaunti lang din kami na nakaupo ng mga reviewers. Kaya sa ngayon ay limited lang siya sa CSSP. Hindi ko alam in the future, pero sa ngayon CSSP lang siya.
Okay. Yes, sir.
No, ma'am. I'd like to give a specific case and I'd like to ask kung may ethical consideration ba siya. And this actually refers to case number 2 na present mo, no, yung may nag-interview, ginamit yung manuscript later sa research. Now, how about, ma'am, like for example, if I conducted an interview to a certain personality and later the interview was published, and a year after, someone conducted a research and then gusto niya gamitin yung interview, so ano ba ma'am, is it okay to just cite yung na-publish or kailangan pa din niyang humingi ng consent from yung in-interview na personality?
Isa-cite mo na yung na-publish. Kasi yung example dyan is yung transcript ng interview ni Salud Algabre na nasa appendix. It's the whole transcript already. You can cite yung publication na. Kasi published na siya and then yun yung isa-cite mo.
Okay. Happy that our on-site participants participated. We return to Zoom for a bit. Suppose that a code of ethics for historians be pursued in the future. Who do you think should craft that code of ethics and their qualifications? Thank you so much, Dr. Wani Obias.
To put it simply, I think it should involve oral history practitioners. Ibig sabihin, hindi lang academic historians, but those in heritage work, archivists, librarians, all of those involved in the process of making historical works, sana ay makonsult sila. Ano yung qualifications nila? Educational degree? Not necessarily. I think if by experience you show perceptiveness towards the need to have an ethics code at meron kayong dalang kaalaman mula dun sa napakahabang experience nyo in the field, I think that more than makes up for whatever educational degrees that you may look for. So I think depende na siya kung ano yung kumbaga kung ano yung dala nilang kaalaman regardless of educational degree. Mas maganda kung yung experience nila. Pero lahat sana ng historical practitioners. Sa ngayon, I think nasa academic level pa lang siya. I don't know if it will broaden. Maybe sana mag-broaden din yan. Unless the code is just for academic historians, then you have a separate one for heritage workers. That's one option din. Pero, yeah. That's something that needs to come out through conversations na.
Thank you so much, Doc. Next question. Good afternoon, Dr. Wani Obias. How can we ethically handle personal documents, diaries, photos, and other materials of a deceased person we want to include in our research? If there is no next of kin, we could ask permission in using their documents.
Okay, yung crucial na question dito from a historian's perspective ay paano niyo nakuha yung documents na 'to? 'Di ba? Paano niyo nakuha 'tong documents na 'to? I mean, if you got the if you got the diaries, photos, and other materials in some malicious manner, then medyo questionable siya. But if these are like published, ibang kasi you have to understand yung context ng documents eh. And then yung provenance ng mga documents. It's not as simple of just I'm identifying this document. You have to be able to elaborate on where that document came from. So 'di ba? Oo, archaeological. Nag-ukay kayo tas may some random house, nag-ukay kayo tapos may baul, tas then you'll know who owned that house, 'di ba? You will still attempt to try to identify the provenance of the document. Who wrote the document, 'di ba? And then dun kayo magsisimula. Dun lagi magsisimula eh. You try to look for yung provenance. And so how do you handle that? Kailangan hanapin niyo muna yung source. And then if it's not published, then you need to try to, make sure na meron kayong rightful access to it. Otherwise, if you're just randomly picking up stuff all over the place and then using it, you're being malicious as well. Hindi naman finders keepers yan, di ba? You have to also respect the dead. Assuming dead na yung gumawa niyan, you also have to respect the dead.
Yan ang Rodeline Obias. Malay mo kung talagang ikaw yun or it was a forged document worth publishing kasi there's no one to ask.
Yeah, so tinuturo sa atin sa kasaysayan na internal and external criticism again, di ba bahagi yan? You look for the provenance, you look for the source, and then you look at the coherence of the document itself. Nagsasabi ba ito ng totoo? Does it make sense? Logical? Those are all tools taught to us in the academe. And so hopefully yung mga history majors, hello sa Zoom, ito ay yung mga napupulot yung skills mula sa mga guro ninyo.
Okay, last question from Zoom. Good afternoon, Dr. Wani Obias. How can we protect our informants from possible harm when we ask them to recall traumatic memories or experiences? How can we prevent the occurrence of discomfort, anxiety, or PTSD?
Okay, this is a nice question because it brings home the point how important ethics is. Your study goes through an ethics review, but if, for example, your study is on comfort women or human rights abuses from human rights victims from martial law, alam mo na they've gone through traumatic experiences. If you go through an ethics review board, the ERB will tell you, oh, dapat naka-indicate dyan na pag mag interview ka at biglang bumalik sa kanya yung trauma niya, ititigil mo. You give the response. This is also taught sa mga oral history classes, diba? If you've taken oral history classes, there's a proper way to conduct interviews. There's a proper way also to address sensitive issues and to address traumatic experiences. This isn't kaya sometimes I feel like maybe students like, interview lang yan, madali yan. It's not. Kailangan ng paghahanda. Kailangan merong ka ring capability to be able to address if an incident like this occurs. What do you do if somebody with trauma suddenly, experiences it again? The usual practice would be to pause. the interview and say, okay, I'll give you some time to compose yourself. Hintayin nyo na kumalma. After which, ay pwede niyong, okay na ba, can we start again? Kung halimbawa hindi okay, then you have to say you can stop the interview anytime. That is what the ethics board dictates on us. The right of the respondent will always take precedence. And the right of the respondent will always be pwede niyang itigil yung kanyang participation sa pag-aaral mo anytime during the process. Kung halimbawa sa simula gusto niya pala, pero nung pinapag-usapan na yung karanasan niya, ay na-realize niya, hindi na pala niya gusto pag-usapan ito. Dapat may karapatan siyang i-withdraw yan. And you, as a researcher, have to respect that. Hindi mo siya pwedeng ipilit. Hindi mo siya kwento eh. Kwento siya nung ini-interview mo. And you, as a researcher, have to respect that. We have the ethics board in place to ensure that this is followed. Kung walang ethics board, we do have cases. Of course, you can imagine yung cases na interviewers who are not trained properly na sobrang insensitive magtanong, na sobrang walang pakialam kung umiiyak ka na dyan. Those are things we want to avoid. Kaya merong ethics review board to ensure protected yung mga participants mo. I guess it's more than just protection. For me, it's about respect and dignity ng mga participants mo. So you as a researcher, respect that. Bahagi sila ng proseso ng pananaliksik. Kaya yan. So we have the ethics review board for that. If you're a if you're a sensitive na researcher, you're conscious of issues na ganito, imbibe na rin siya sa practice mo eh. Even let's say kahit walang ethics review board, kung ikaw, there are particularly very good interviewers who are just, ang galing lang nila. They're just sensitive to this. Then they know it and they handle this very carefully. Yun yung ideal. Yun yung maganda. Especially kung ganito yung mga cases na hinahandle nyo.
Amazing. Amazing. All right. One last chance for the on-site participants. Speak now or forever hold your... Baka may... Yes, meron pang isa.
Hello po, magandang araw. Ako po si John Bill Sabacan from PUP po. Madalas po nating nakita na yung mga ethical guidelines po ay madalas sa interview and yung mga pakikipag-usap po. How about naman po doon sa mga let's say mga social media posts like comments, ganun po, and anything na pwede anything na sources na pwede nating kunin sa social media such as sa Facebook po, yun na madalas gamitin ng mga Filipino. May separate po bang ethics guidelines doon sa mga 'yan? Ayun lang po.
Sa ngayon ay wala. Alam niyo na yung epekto ng fake news and historical distortion. I mean, look at the past election, how dirty it was, how everything was just so rampant in social media. And so, that's one other aspect na kailangan tingnan. Kasi whether we like it or not, andyan yung mga kasinungalingan, andyan yung kabaluktutan. Paano inaayos yan? Paano ina-address yan? Kasi you can ask, what can we do as academics? What can the government do also as well? What can ordinary citizens do to address this? Iba-iba yung magiging role natin. Okay, so if you look at disinformation studies, inaaral na rin nila ito. Meron silang recommendations dyan. Halimbawa, at the government level, there should be laws in place that regulate, etong mga, let's say, political campaigns. Dapat may mga transparency on what PR firms they hire, so on and so forth. May mga ganyang recommendations. On the level of the educational sector, may iba din recommendations, information dissemination, things like that. So iba-iba yung magiging recommendations dyan. But it drives home the point na mahalaga siyang usapin. Kasi we know that something's wrong, right? I mean, we know na may mali. You can look at the Trump, anong nangyayari sa Amerika din ngayon. We can see all this dissemination of fake news and all of those fabricated na lies nila. So, what are we going to do as a society with that? That's an important question. And does it fall under ethics? Yes. Should we have guidelines for that? Um, that's something that we should talk about, whether dapat ba kasama siya o hindi.
Right. Any last comments, reactions, questions? Kung wala na, maraming salamat no sa ating lahat
Thank
sa inyong
you.
questions at kay Dr. Wani Obias. To further express our gratitude, I would like to call on the UP Diliman Research Ethics Board Chair, Dr. Maria Corazon de Ungria, for the awarding of the Certificate of Appreciation. Okay. And thank you again. We would like to thank all of us, yes, tinama yung sarili, for the mess we made this noon. Uh, thank you for your questions, your participation to our audience. Thank you, Dr. Wani Obias, for her invaluable insights on research ethics and integrity. We would also like to thank our attendees for making MESS an incredible success. Thank you for having lunch with us. Check out the next episode of MESS on March 13, 2025. March 13, 2025. Recalibrating Ethics Reporting in Philippine Psychology, a review of the Philippine Journal of Psychology from 2010 to 2021 with Associate Professor J.A. Yakat. Not that J. Goodbye and see you. Follow UPD Reb on social media at UPD Reb on Facebook, X, and LinkedIn, and at reb.upd on Instagram. And of course, subscribe to UPD Reb's YouTube channel at UPD Liman Reb for the recorded episodes of MESS. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Sorry? Yes, of course, the ever important evaluation form that is the key to your certificates. For those who are participating on site, um, the QR code is right there at the registration area. For those online, please scan the QR that is or was flashed on the screen and is sent to Zoom in the chat. Okay. Again, thank you very much and see you again next month.